The search for the remains of Patrick Sarsfield have moved a step closer, with efforts underway to locate and repatriate one of Limerick's most famous historical figures. Patrick Sarsfield is believed to have been buried in the Belgian town of Huy. Joining me this morning is David O'Brien, Chief Executive of Limerick Civic Trust, and French Honorary Consul in Limerick, Dr. Loïc Guyon. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning, Trevor.
Loïc, I might start with you first of all. The Sarsfield Homecoming Project, you've been heavily involved with this from the start. Tell me about, I suppose, the aims of that.
Yes, well, it all stems from the launch of the Limerick Bastille Day Wild Geese Festival back in 2019, and the interest that I developed, therefore, in the history of the wild geese and in the connections between France and Ireland. And so last October with David, we decided to embark in this crazy project to try to locate the remains of Patrick Sarsfield and repatriate them to Ireland. And it was on the 26th of November that I sent a letter to the mayor of Huy, so that Belgian town where we believe Patrick Sarsfield to be buried, requesting the assistance of the city council of Huy in our quest for those remains. And I asked them to send us a number of documents, which they did send us at the end of January, beginning of February. And thanks to those documents, we've been able to make substantial progress.
Okay, David, to bring you in, I mean, as Loïc said, this was maybe a fantastic dream to find and locate the remains of Patrick Sarsfield. How confident were you that something like this could work?
I had no confidence in it whatsoever. My confidence is in Loïc and his passion and enthusiasm. The man came at this with such academic skill, and he just came at it like a scalpel. And he's been brilliant. He's done in the last 6 months, 12 months, what people for the last 200 or 300 years have failed to do. A lot of people have tried to source, tie down or pinpoint Sarsfield's remains and failed. So the enthusiasm and the energy of this man just is carried us all with him.
Okay, Loïc, we do know that in 1793 Patrick Sarsfield was fatally injured and he was buried, and we know, as you said, the location, the rough location of where he was. So that was a starting point, but there's over, I suppose, the mists of time, that exact location, you were starting from really a blank canvas. Would that be fair to say?
Well, almost. We had good evidence that he had been buried in Huy, but of course we had to go back to the sources and check that evidence. So go back to all the reports which were made to the King of France at the time, Louis XIV, about what happened at the Battle of Neerwinden on the 29th of July, 1693, and in the aftermath of that battle. What we know for sure is that Patrick Sarsfield was seriously injured at the battle on the 29th, and then on the 13th of August, there is a report made to the king in Versailles stating that Patrick Sarsfield died of his wounds in the city of Huy. And thanks to the documents that were sent to us by the city of Huy, we've been able to find some entries in the death registers of the St. Martin's Church in Huy, showing that a number of French officers were buried not in the cemetery of the church as we had previously thought, but actually inside the church. And we have the exact location of the place where they were buried. So unfortunately, there is no mention of Patrick Sarsfield by name, but we have a number of anonymous French officers who are mentioned in the registers. So one of them could very well be Patrick Sarsfield himself. And even if it's not the case, it's extremely likely that Patrick Sarsfield would have been buried next to those officers within the church.
Okay, last year there was great excitement with what was believed to be the discovery of the resting place of Redue Odonnell in Spain. There was great excitement, but it doesn't seem like his remains could be confirmed.
Actually, I believe what happened with the remains of Redue Odonnell is that they are located below a building, below a bank, I think, and it would cost a fortune to actually have to destroy the ground of that bank to search for his remains. But in the case of Patrick Sarsfield, that's the great news that we've been able to confirm this week, only a few days ago, is that the area where the French officers have been buried, so that the inside of the church, is now located in the back garden of a property in the city center of Huy, which means that technically this area is accessible.
Okay, David, what next then? Where do we go from here?
Well, what next? This whole thing comes from the fact that Limerick is this ancient and noble city that's had huge pan-European links. There are 4 European countries involved in this project as we talk. And the most important thing is that people in Limerick just start appreciating their own history and the emphasis Limerick has had on European history and how we've impacted across the continent. And I think, especially at this time with Brexit and everything, this is an amazing opportunity to rebuild a lot of those bridges, which historically were strong and there, just have been neglected for many years. And Loïc has managed to reboard or repave 1 or 2 of them. So what next? We do a little bit more investigation in Huy and see what is actually in the ground and get some tests and things done. Equally, we start talking to other people about other artefacts of Sarsfield. And Sarsfield is the subject today, but this is the military history of Limerick. This is the civil history of Limerick. It's about bringing that back to focus again and putting ourselves centre stage. For far too long, Limerick has been the 5th city in a country where it should be the 3rd city and maybe even the 2nd city. And we really need to focus on that. Our future depends on our history, and our own narrative is very important. So it's how we write that narrative and what the next steps are. Physically, I think Loïc and I need to get to Belgium. We need to talk to some of the authorities over there and start making arrangements. There's an awful lot has happened that we can't talk about with the French military and some other bodies in Europe who are willing to assist us and help us. Loïc might wish to say something about that. He may not. But no, there's a huge quest ahead of us and a long road.
Loïc, would you agree with that? A long road ahead. A lot of work to be done.
Well, a lot of work to be done, to get the authorization to actually carry out some archaeological diggings on the site, get DNA sample to identify if ever we manage to find some remains. And as David mentioned, we also had some great news yesterday evening. Actually, the history department of the French Defense Ministry has agreed to help us to try to delve into their archives and try to see whether they have anything that could help us about Patrick Sarsfield. But I'd like to say just one thing. If people are interested in what we are doing, they can follow us on our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram accounts at Limerick Wild. That's these are the social networks accounts of the Limerick Bastille Day Wild Geese Festival. And really, I'd like to thank the Limerick Civic Trust for all the support, and in particular, David O'Brien for all the support that he's been giving me and the festival over the past year or so.
David, you'd also like to see Sarsfield Statue moved from its location, its current location.
Well, here you go. We have 2 or 3 great statues in Limerick. I mean, really great statues, good pieces. One is Daniel O'Connell sitting on Connell Avenue, which the Civic Trust addressed a number of years ago and still run the fountain there on behalf of the City and County Council. But, we have to do that because nobody else was doing it. And Sarsfield is sitting hidden up in John's Church, John's Cathedral. It's a wonderful statue. It's wonderful that it's there. It would be better if it was more prominent and more in a more visible place. And equally the question, if we do get his remains, where are we going to inter them? Do we create a sarcophagus somewhere prominent in Limerick, somewhere significant? Do we bury him next to Tyrconnell? Do we find Tyrconnell's grave in Limerick? There's so many questions to ask yet. But the most important thing, Trevor, is that this festival this year will be one of the biggest events in Limerick with everything else being cancelled. So we are going full steam ahead to get this going in July. And we're looking for people to help us to sponsor it, to put resources into it, to put energy into it, the same energy that Loïc is putting into it. We're creating historical... we're gathering historical data and facts and pieces and artifacts. But the reality is that it's going to focus on something that's very live and energetic and possibly the biggest thing in Limerick this year if COVID allows. We're going for July, so everything else has been cancelled up till then.
Okay, look, just to finish, I suppose, on a more mundane point, it must be huge. It will be a huge undertaking, but I suppose the financial cost of it and the archaeological work that will have to go in if this project is to be successful.
Yes, indeed, and we'll definitely need to have support in that regard. And but as David mentioned, this is becoming a European project actually, with not only France and Ireland involved, of course, but also Belgium, perhaps also
Italy.
the Italian embassy based in Lucan. But this is great. I think it's very timely in the context of what is happening, of Brexit and everything. France is now Ireland's closest EU neighbor. So I'm absolutely delighted that I'm able to contribute to trying to bring back such an important figure in Irish history to where he belongs.
And Trevor, if I could just say
yes.
on that, as we say goodbye to our great and wonderful British cousins who've been fantastic to us for years, we need to embrace our French brothers, because they've been there in the sidelines for far too long. And here's one of the opportunities, and the first opportunity to do so.
Okay, very good point. Finally, Loïc, best case scenario, when could we get, I suppose, movement on this and a definite discovery, if I can put it like that?
Movement in the next 2 or 3 months, an actual discovery or confirmation, it will be perhaps before the end of the year. That's possible in the most optimistic scenario. Otherwise, it could perhaps take another year. But there is a possibility that we'll make a substantial discovery by the end of this year.
Okay, very good.
And I think it's also fair to just add into that, like that. A lot more has happened than we can go public about at the moment. We know of a lot more that we haven't substantiated yet, but we've an awful lot more data that we've got to assess and go through and people to talk to. There's a much bigger project that's growing rapidly under our feet, and I think Loïc and I are we're quite almost dazed by the amount of energy and enthusiasm amongst communities around Ireland and elsewhere across Europe that have thrown themselves at this.